So we thought we'd do a slightly different video this time round, and rather than just doing the product reviews and all the hitting, we'd answer a few of the questions that we get asked most often week in, week out. So kind of effectively FAQs, run through what it is that people ask and what the answers are to give you as much info as possible rather than just hitting shots. The one we get asked absolutely the most is whether someone's good enough or not, and really, it's a question that's completely understandable. That the assumption would be that this is for the elite golfer, the low handicapper, scratch golfer. Now, actually, the reality of the answer is for the best players. You're making little small fine tunes in terms of ball flight, spin, distance gapping, getting a feel that they want to get the ball flight in a particular flight window. Whereas actually for the mid to high handicapper, there's far more you can do. Actually, it's far more applicable to the higher handicapper because there's a little bit more variability in their action. And there's a little bit more inconsistency to the shot. So actually, by getting the equipment suiting how you move and how you swing, and the club head suiting the type of shots that we're trying to hit. For example, not trying to play a 3-wood when a 5-wood will fly just as far, if not further, and therefore be more forgiving, or playing a hybrid instead of a long iron. Those sorts of things, getting the right base equipment in the bag can make a far bigger proportionate difference. So for the low handicap, we're nipping around the edges trying to fine tune something, whereas actually we can save multiple shots for the mid to high handicapper and really improve the enjoyment of the game. So it's far more applicable for that golfer. So lessons or fitting, again, a major question we get asked, and when should one come for a fitting? If you're going through lessons, what's the right timing? Should I have lessons or be fit? And the answer is, there's room for everything in there. And ultimately, every player, even the world's #1, has lessons, or every player should have lessons. If you consider, Scotty Scheffler, Xander Schauffele, Rory McIlroy, they all have regular coaching. So for all golfers, lessons are applicable. I think relative to a fitting addresses the fundamentals of, do the clubs suit the way you move? And now if you're going through lessons and making a major swing change, then that isn't the right time to come for a fitting. Once that's bedded in and settled down and feels, sometimes changing swing can feel like a different sport. So letting it feel a little more comfortable and that you have a bit of predictability once you've made those changes, that's then the right time to come in for a fitting. You don't have to be completely through the whole change and making it feel like it's really 100% bedded in, but getting through that initial change, because ultimately what you're changing is the line of the swing and some of the patterns and sequences. And as long as you're not changing the way you generate your speed, then it's perfectly fine to come for a fitting before that process is finished. If you're thinking of having lessons, then I would at least initiate that before a fitting session. I know a lot of coaches, so Stuart, who coaches here, would say get fitted first, and there are arguments both ways around, but from a fitter's point of view, we'd rather see the direction of travel from a swing point of view, and we can make allowances for that with the clubs once we know what you're actually doing. So longevity of clubs, golf clubs aren't cheap, so a completely valid question of how long you can expect a set of clubs to last. If you're not going through major swing work, or if you don't have an injury, and you put it into context, I've kept my driver for 6 years, I've kept my irons for 6-7 years, and as long as physically you stay in similar shape and that your swing strength and your mobility stays relevant, there's no reason you can't carry on using those clubs. So ultimately, a set of irons, for example, could last up to 10 years. A lot of it boils down to, when does the player want to change? Now, we do see technological advancements, particularly over the last sort of 5-10 years with the woods, and so forgiveness has been augmented over the years. But generally speaking, most of the time we're looking at 3 to 5 years as a sort of broadly the time frame to change. The woods sometimes are a little bit more regular, so on the lower end of that, and irons 5 years plus. So as long as physically you stay similar to where you are when you get fitted, and don't make a wholehearted kind of massive swing change, then there's no reason to change those clubs. So juniors and fitting is always is a slightly more complicated matter because you've got someone growing, you're getting taller and bigger and stronger throughout their the next sort of 5, 6, 7 years. So knowing what and when is the right time to do it is a little bit more shades of grey rather than black and white. Generally speaking, we would always say getting fitted and establishing what someone actually needs from their clubs is always a good start point. You don't have to start with a full set of 14 clubs. 14 is a maximum, and even in adult fittings we often won't build sets of 14 clubs. So you can start from a kind of pared back, more kind of basic set start point and build out as the player grows. But often what we'd always try and do with juniors is build in as much progression as possible. So based on where the player is at the point they come in, we want to challenge that youngster a little bit so that we're pushing the boundaries a bit. Otherwise they grow out of it in no time at all. So ideally stretch the setup to the limit in terms of a little bit of length progression, or length buffer, so that there's room for growth, and then weight buffer. So make sure they're not unplayable, but we want to test that player a little bit so that as they grow and strengthen, for the first sort of 3 to 6 months they're kind of getting towards their best. Then there's a 6 to 9 month plus period where they're really good, and then they'll still last a little bit longer where they're a hair light. So ideally getting a good year to 2 years worth of usage before there's any change required. But we all know how quickly juniors can grow. Sometimes they just shoot up, and so it's trying to avoid making a change just before that, and always try and make a change on the second half of that stage. So mixing and matching brands, absolutely something that you see, some of the top tour pros who don't have the big contracts. So something like a Rory is, Century's contracted with TaylorMade, so all his clubs are TaylorMade. But actually some of the players who haven't, take Brooks Koepka over the years, has had a mixture of brands in the bag, and it's perfectly normal to do that. Actually, it's not normal to play the same brand all the way through. It's something that we can always do our best to accommodate, and if a player is willing to compromise a bit on performance to have the same brand, ultimately it's the player's choice what they have in the bag. We're here to advise, not dictate what you have. However, more often than not, you'll find that if you go through a fitting and get the best performing products, you will have a probably different, certainly kind of driver or wood head to iron heads. I've got a different driver brand to fairway brand to hybrid to iron brand to irons. So we're just looking to put the best performing clubs in your bag, no matter what head and shaft combinations they are, and as a result, one will often find you have a mixture of brands in the bag. But if someone is very brand conscious, and you've got to look forward to using the clubs that you purchase, they're yours, and we want you to enjoy using them. If you are brand loyal, then we'll always do our best to accommodate that and make them work as well as possible. So fittings can cover a range of options. It can be an individual club, be it driver, a fairway wood, a hybrid. Obviously irons you generally do a set of. It can be an individual wedge or a set of wedges. So we do individual club fittings all the way through to the full bag. The full bag fittings are long. They are physically demanding. So if someone's local and can split them into 2 sessions, we generally advise that, just because it's a lot of shots to hit. If you take a round of golf, you're hitting somewhere between 35 and let's say 50 full swings, and the rest are taken up by shorter shots and putts. So a full bag fitting will generally be over 100 shots. We try and limit it as much as we can, because there is a natural tail off once you get beyond a certain point. But yep, can be anything from a single club to all 13. The putter we do is a separate session though. So what to expect from a fitting is we'd want you to bring your existing clubs with you, and that way we can look at the specs, measure all the specifications, length, look at what the components are, what head it is, what shaft, what grip, what length, what swing weight, what loft, what lie. So that gives us the benchmark. We'll run you through what those specifications mean and where you can see variations through the set. Often just by analysing that, we can highlight why one club or one part of the bag will play a particular way versus the rest, and can explain why you're seeing what you're seeing on course. And we'll get some base data with your existing clubs, whether it's irons, driver, fairway wood, to benchmark against. That gives us a baseline to say, right, we need to improve upon this. And then through hitting fitting with all the various options, all the relevant options, we can dial into what the best combination of head and shaft are, backed up by the data, backed up by how you feel with them as well. You've got to be comfortable with that as well. They've got to be enjoyable to hit. And then we can run you through, right, this is the best that we can do, this is where your current ones are, and this is the benefit and the gain that you can expect to see or not. From there we can then advise on what the priorities are or what we'd advise doing and changing from there, provide quotations, and then from that point it's then up to you what you choose to do. But again, it's all going to be backed up by data and by reason, telling you why there are differences and what you can expect to see off the back of it. Yeah, so the build process is ultimately, it's no different in its nuts and bolts, the basics that they would be made in factory. And the difference is that we don't have build targets to achieve. We're not churning out thousands of clubs a day. We've got experienced expert technicians who are making tens of clubs a day, so there will be a few sets go out each day, so they can focus and spend time dialing in and getting we work to much tighter tolerances because we have a lower amount of clubs we have to turn out, and that gives them the time to build them as exactly as possible. So all our machinery is all calibrated together, so every morning all the swing weight scales are calibrated, all the loft line machines are calibrated, so we know across all of our equipment that they match one another. So where if you get a factory-made set, considering the amount of clubs that they make, the tolerances are good. They're often working to half a swing weight point above and below, so it's a whole swing weight point in build. For us, that's a lot. We're working to 0.1, 0.2 of a swing weight point, so you're taking a tenth of that. And that's why during the fitting we test with little bits of lead tape and fine tune. There's a point to doing it because we can build it that same way. So that ensures that what you test in the fitting bay is what you receive at the end of the day. So the other aspect is the puring. SST Pure is a technology of shaft alignment. So it's a bit like balancing a car wheel. It doesn't change the actual structure of the shaft, but once it's cut and trimmed, it's then loaded into a machine that tests its consistency in 360 degrees, and then based around the stiffest point we'll find the most stable position to build that shaft into the head. As the shaft loads and recovers, we want it recovering back onto the target line, and if it's out of alignment, it's a bit like balancing a car wheel. If a wheel's offline, the car's pulling in a direction you don't want to go. It's exactly the same for a shaft. So ultimately, again, there are thousands of shafts made a day, and we're just trying to minimize any offline twisting and bending that can do. So that's part of the process of the build. That's why the logos can come out anywhere on the shaft, rather than just logo down or logo up. But that's part of the build process and part of really dialing into the real kind of minutiae of the build to make sure that they're as good as possible, even to the point of weighing each grip that goes on each club. Again, there are tolerances on grip weight, so we're making sure that when we build that club, we're not accounting for any of those tolerances. We know which grip's going on which club, and that it's swing weighted according to that, rather than just getting 10 grips, finding you've got 3 or 4 gram tolerance on them, and then the swing weights go up and down through the set as well. So it's those sort of details we can go into. Yeah, I think having a bad day in the fitting bay, whether it's a lesson or a fitting, is something that we're all worried about. Myself, I want to. You go out and you want to perform, and you want to give your best in that session, and ultimately everyone has good and bad days. So one of the things that we've got to be honest with the person in the fitting bay is that if we're not comfortable that we're seeing as good or as consistent the data as we'd like, or equally speaking, if the player just feels that their game's off a little bit, then part of that process is communicating that with one another and saying, you know what, actually, you can still get 90% of the way there, and unless someone's got the shanks, then there's nothing you can do about it. But we would always say, you know what, let's just come back in, have a half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, just to loop back around, cross-reference any specs. It's in our interest to make sure that the player walks out with the right clubs, and forcing a result through in a fit just because someone's here, it gets difficult if you're traveling from distance, and so that can present a bit of a challenge. But ultimately the worst thing for both parties is someone walking away with something that they feel like they ought to purchase rather than knowing it's the right thing, and we want to know that it's the right thing too. So something that we will regularly do is just recommend a follow-up session, pop in, cross-reference, make absolutely certain that it's spot on, and then quite often that second session, one, you're fresh, two, mentally a little bit clearer as well, and it is really valuable to do that just to make absolutely certain, because for both of us, neither the player nor us want the player to get the wrong clubs. We're pulling for you as much as you're pulling for yourself. It's in our interests. It's the reason we're here, is to give you the right clubs. So there's absolutely no reason to not do that kind of brief follow-up. Something we'll always be open to doing if the player's not certain, just to make sure we get it right. Yeah, I think the question of is the latest greatest, is that's still the case? I think that now is more pertinent than ever. I think where, particularly on your driver head tech, that's been pushed pretty quicker and further than the rest of the bag, and we're at a point now where you can actually, if you're not considered with how you go about and don't test properly, then actually you could buy a new head and work out with a worse performance than an old head of 3 or 4 years back. The geometry of the head, the weight positioning, the latest heads doesn't suit everybody, or there are very specific characteristics that are going to suit specific swing styles. So it can be just buying the new model of something you've had before. Let's just take, for example, if you've got a TaylorMade M2 and you buy a QI10, depending on where your strike point is, that might not be the right thing for you. So it's always best, spend a little bit more time, make sure you test them out, make sure you get data to quantify what that difference actually is, because whilst technically everything is better than it used to be, it's not just new equals better. Actually, there are some players where a slightly older head, where the weight's a little less exaggerated, particularly on driver, can produce slightly more consistent results. And again, there's got to be value in that change. You don't want to spend £500 on a new driver and get nothing for it. In most cases, broadly speaking, the latest heads are better across the face, more forgiving, technically a little bit more ball speed, but there are pros and cons to that, and you've got to make sure that all aspects are covered off before pulling the trigger on a purchase. So yeah, with the amount of options behind me, from us, we're completely brand agnostic. So without wishing to sound flippant about it, we really don't mind what head shaft combination goes together, as long as it's the best performing for you and as long as it's within your budget. If a stock shaft works best for you, then absolutely it's just the right one, even if it's technically not the highest quality, as long as it's the best shaft if it works best for you. Equally speaking, all options are open as well. So what the array that's behind me allows us to do is to really dial into which shafts are right and why. So actually, in the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes of fitting, we're narrowing those options down by 90% of them are the wrong weight, so those can go. And in the next 50% are the wrong balance point, so those can go. So actually, whilst there's a huge array behind us, and as a starting point, everything's on the table, very quickly we can start to narrow down to a small number of them in the grand scheme of things, and that's when we can really dial the testing in. So any head, any shaft combination is within reason, is doable, and just the vast array allows us to not have to compromise on one aspect to optimize performance. So most asked question, what's the most important part of the club head or club shaft? Club head or shaft. Ultimately, both. This sounds really political answer, but both are equally as important, but they are important for slightly different reasons. So from a club head point of view, you're looking at it affects the launch and the spin characteristics, it affects margin of error on strike. So depending on where your miss is, if you're more at the toe or the heel, there are certain, for example, driver heads that are better or more consistent from certain miss patterns. Take Callaway boys being very good slightly out the heel, and your ping very stable slightly out the toe. So you can utilize the head style to manage a miss, and to optimize launch and spin characteristics as well. But you're looking more at I guess a bit of ball speed consistency and flight characteristics from the head. And then from a shaft, yes, bend profiles, kick points, and how the shaft loads and unloads will marginally affect the flight, and you can fine-tune little bits on that respect. But what you're really doing with the shaft is the shaft's primary function, in my opinion, is that it helps the player deliver the club head in sync with how they move, so ultimately with control. It helps time the swing and mean that you're not compensating to deliver the club head. So obviously club head weight plays a factor in that as well, but ultimately the dead weight, the balance point, because of the range of motion and the acceleration pattern, that mass property of the shaft is the biggest key in delivering the head with consistency. And then bend profile, stiffness, that impacts the feel and some of the launch characteristics. So you're kind of tuning in the tactile elements a little bit as well. Sound off the club head, again, feel, and how nice the ball sounds off the club face, how it feels to strike. But the shaft is really about getting consistency of delivery and therefore tightening up that shot pattern, and the club head is margin of error, so mitigating a missed strike and launch and spin characteristics. So important, equally as important, but for different reasons. So yeah, results wise, as I said, there's ultimately just that the clubs are complementing what you do. I can't sit here and say, oh, we're going to give you 20 yards, or we're going to narrow dispersion by 50%, or add a club length and irons, because it depends what your start point is and how well your current clubs actually perform for you already. So what we can guarantee is that the clubs aren't going to be getting in the way of you improving. We can make sure that the clubs are doing the right sort of jobs for you, and that you're not having to battle them in order to get the best from them. As I say, depending on where someone is in their kind of golf journey, we can pitch them to challenge a little bit, or to kind of for someone who's improving or getting bigger and stronger, or we can pitch them at someone, if someone's got an injury and we don't want to force someone to work hard, we can pitch them a little bit back from full out, so they're easier to get the best out of. But ultimately, you can expect to walk away knowing what's right for you, with a recommendation of what's right for you, with reasons why it's right for you, and hopefully a better understanding of what is encompassed in the right setup, and a bit of a better understanding about your game as well. I think that's one of the biggest compliments that I feel I get from people when they say, oh, I learned a lot today. I think we want to empower the player with a bit more knowledge and a better understanding of their clubs and their game as a result of that. But ultimately, club-wise, just something that works for you, works with you, and hopefully gives you the most enjoyment possible on the golf course. So I hope that's answered some of the questions that you may have. They're certainly the ones that we get asked the most often, but any questions you have, please feel free to message in, let us know. And if you've liked this format, again, like, subscribe, and we'll do another version of it. And so send the questions in, we'll get answers to you as quickly as we can.